Hi, everyone. Welcome to a conversation on the Legend Fiction Show. We're joined today by Tony Kolenc. Welcome, Tony. Good to have you back with us.
I am so glad to be back, Dominic. It's good to see you.
Agreed. Likewise, we've had you, I think, once or twice on the channel before, and you've participated in both our Legend Haven cons in the last 2 years, and it's now, well, as of this recording, over a solid month since we've had Legend Haven 2023. And you've got a new book come out this year. So I want to ask you about that book. Actually, let's start with that. Let's talk about the book. It's book number 5 in your Harwood Mysteries. You know, if you hold that up, Murder in Penwood Manor.
We're at Penwood Manor. In fact, if you recall, I launched Book 5 at Legend Haven 2023. That was my official book launch.
That is awesome, and that's exactly why we've put together Legend Haven. Okay, I got to ask you, what was your take on Legend Haven? What did you like about it? Why do you think that sort of thing is important?
I think it's great. I mean, you're bringing together so many people, young and old. You've got something for every possible nerd out there, right? I mean, if you like The Lord of the Rings, if you like science fiction, if you just like different types of religious genres, you had a little bit of something for everybody. And I had some great folks show up at my book launch. It was interactive. We were talking about actually writing a series. That was the other thing I did was I talked about writing a fiction series. And I had some obviously experienced writers who already had some books out. I had other people who were new, different ages. I even had a 80-something-year-old woman in my audience, as well as very young people. So I think you're doing a great job of really bringing in a diverse audience to talk about cool things about writing and reading and these different genres. So obviously, it's something that you want to continue to grow, and I really hope it does because I think we need more of these kinds of conferences where people, especially people of faith, but people can meet up and actually support each other and get excited about writing and excited about each other's work too.
Absolutely agree on all these points. And you yourself are doing exactly the same sort of thing with your own series. Let me just read your little bio here. You're a law professor, retired Air Force officer, and an author of multiple books and articles, as well as a fiction series for teens from Loyola Press. So your medieval series, the Harwood Mysteries, has, 5 books now, and it's already won 8 book awards, which is fantastic. So let's talk about that. Last time we chatted about this, you described it as Harry Potter meets Cadfile. Tell us where you go in book 5.
So, book 5. So real quick for those who didn't see the other interview, it is a series that takes place in 12th century England. It's historical fiction, but it's really sort of a mystery adventure series. It's got the history in there, but it's definitely got a lot of the fun fiction. It's written for teens, 10 and up, high school, middle school. They love it. And it follows my main character is Zan, who winds up, after having his village attacked by bandits, he winds up at Harwood Abbey, which is where we get the name of the series, the Harwood Mysteries. But he doesn't stay at Harwood Abbey. Books 1 and 2 and 3 have a lot going on at Harwood Abbey. Book 4 that we talked about last year was in Lincoln, which is a city, about a 2-day journey at that time from Harwood Abbey. And book 5 is actually bringing them back to the Abbey and the Manor. So it's Zan and 2 girl characters are my main trio, if you will, Lucy, Christina, and Zan. And so each of the books in the series I've tried to do a little something different with. And book 5 is my murder mystery. So I already showed this to you, but I'll show it again because it's such a great cover from Loyola
That's
Press.
obvious.
And
No.
you can see this guy up here is my Crusader. So book 5 deals with the Crusades. In fact, it takes place in 1187. So the Third Crusade is about to kick off because Saladin just takes back Jerusalem at the very end of book 5, actually, is kind of the historical event that's referenced. But our main character, who is our main suspect in the murder, is this crusader who has been coming back from the Holy Land recently, and he's not quite right. His experience in the Holy Land has changed him, And Zan and Christina and Lucy are trying to figure out, is he the real murderer or is it somebody else? And are they going to prevent an innocent man from being executed? So it was sort of my homage to Agatha Christie. I loved reading Agatha Christie books when I was growing up also. And I wanted to, write sort of a murder whodunit. And so that's what book 5 is.
What's something that maybe you had to do differently about your writing or the structuring process in crafting a murder whodunit as opposed to the other novels you've done?
Yeah, so book 3 was probably the closest in what I had to do because book 3 was a jewel thief whodunit. Somebody stole fire, Eden's fire, this precious ruby, and Zan and Lucy at that time, were trying to solve that. So it had I think, a similar type of progress I had to do here. But here, of course, the stakes are a lot higher. There's actually a murder. There has to be enough suspects who were involved that you can believe that they are actually capable of committing murder. The theme in book 5, so all of my books have a different theme to them, whether it's forgiveness, pride, vanity. Book 5's theme is actually envy, and I think rightfully so. If you recall Cain and Abel's story, Cain murders his brother Abel out of envy because God accepted Abel's sacrifice and not Cain's. And so that story is relayed in the book too, as we kind of explore the vice of envy and how it can cause people to kill each other. And so we have to have enough characters who potentially could have a motive, such as envy, to commit murder. And so that was kind of fun because then you have to bring in characters that you think this person could actually murder somebody, maybe. And so that's a little different. So that was the main thing that I had to change. And because it was taking place in one of the manors outside of Harwood Abbey, so back in the Middle Ages, as you sure probably recall, under the feudal system and the manor system, an abbey such as the Benedictine Abbey like Harwood would actually own villages as part of this kind of feudal system that they lived in. And so Penwood Manor is one of these poor villages that Harwood Abbey owns. And so that was really the first book that I put in the village itself. Most of the other books are either in the city, at Lincoln, or at the Abbey itself. And so this was a little different too, adding kind of that small rural village life to the story.
As the story is progressing, you're going through new historical eras, new historical events are taking place. Did you learn anything while researching and writing this story that surprised you that maybe you didn't know?
So I read a few books on the Crusades, and especially focusing on the Third Crusade. And although that actually becomes even more in book 6, which is, by the way, going to be the final book in the series, I wrote it this last summer, sent it off to Loyola Press, and they'll be editing it this year. And that actually takes the characters out of England to Moorish Portugal, living amongst the Muslims there. So I learned a heck of a lot there, but sort of in preparation as I'm getting, my characters are getting closer and closer to the Third Crusade. And of course, and I learned more about the Hospitallers and of course the Knights Templar, which was pretty cool. And this last summer, I went to Ireland actually on a trip with my family and got to visit just one of the Templar churches that was in ruins in Ireland, which was pretty cool. And so I've been learning more and more about that because in my prior books, I never really had to get into the Crusades except in the most barest of forms. So book 5 and then especially 6, really brought me full on. And it's such a fascinating topic. I mean, seeing the dynamics. I mean, gosh, unfortunately, we have this horrible war going on in the Middle East right now with Hamas and Israel. But I mean, it's the same stuff that was going on, thousands of years ago, and you can see the roots of it, as you do all this research. So yeah, that was one area that I definitely learned a lot more in.
That's so just intriguing. One thing that's also curious, yourself being Catholic and you're writing about, I assume, nominally Catholic or passionately Catholic characters, perhaps in a Christian Middle Ages. Was there anything that about being Christian as you're crafting these stories that challenges, let's say, your sensibilities as a modern Catholic, or that shows how doctrine has developed. And it's like, oh, we today don't think anymore like that. And um, curious if anything came up like that you thought was it's interesting how we've come since that time.
The biggest issue, I think, is how far we've come in how we view other world religions and specifically how we view Islam. You can imagine a truly medieval person in the 12th century, in between the Second and Third Crusade, would not have a very high opinion of Muslims in the Middle East, especially. And so, on the one hand, I have to sort of convey that distrust, that disdain that would have been the Western view towards, Islam, and how they would have viewed it. And on the other hand, it's like you really can't write this horribly bigoted book today and send it to our children.
I
That
expect
doesn't
to do well.
and that doesn't take into account sort of Vatican II and kind of modern sensibilities and understandings about religions, and also looking back more honestly about the Crusades themselves. But then we've also had that going on as sort of like this demonization of the Crusades too, and trying to walk that line where I'm not glorifying the warfare of the Crusades, I'm not demonizing it, I'm also not demonizing Islamic figures. And so Saladin, thankfully, my job was made much easier by the fact that it was widely acknowledged that the Sultan Saladin, who was the main Muslim leader at this time and took back Jerusalem, he was very well respected and regarded as an honorable man. And so, because he had such a kind of legendary reputation, it made it a little bit easier also to be able to present that part of history as not being that different than what they might have thought about him. But yeah, that was the issue that I think, and it's harder in book 6, because in book 6 I actually bring them to live among
Grabbing the bull by
Muslims.
the horns.
It's
Yeah,
one thing to talk about Muslims in England versus having to live among them, in Portugal. And so book 6 became a more delicate task.
fascinating. I imagine at that time in Portugal. Well, we'll have you come back and talk about that because that's
Yeah,
something I totally
definitely.
forgot. Like that time, Portugal was like a nation divided or whoops, constantly at war with this sort of thing, with its identity or something. My history
Yes, I
is so
can't wait when I talk about book 6 to tell you all that I have learned about the Moors in Portugal at this time. I didn't know almost any of this stuff at the time, so it's been
it's
amazing.
incredible. Yeah, and I only know of like one solitary figure throughout these crusading periods who went to minister to them. That would being Saint Francis, and he's such a it's such a strange and fascinating vignette in his life that just doesn't make into it doesn't make it into our gardens and our Sunday school stories. But for those who don't know, just Google it: Saint Francis traveling to visit the Muslims, and it's just an amazing.
Yeah. And that was about maybe 40 years after the events that are taking place in book 5 too. I really wanted to be able to bring St. Francis into my Harwood
Okay.
Mysteries series, but the timing just never quite worked out.
Hmm. Maybe he's born by the I don't know.
Yeah, I mean he's kind of born there, but he's also in Italy, so I've also got to deal with that
It's true.
problem.
It's true. Well, we've kind of segued into a point you wanted to talk about, which is the need for uh, religious fiction for teens. And so, first, I want to ask, well, what does religious fiction then mean for you? And then we'll ask you why it's important, especially for teens. But how would you define religious fiction?
Yeah, I think almost I'd want to redefine how we'd even characterize the conversation, because I actually don't think about the Harvard Mysteries as religious fiction. Like I think about the life of a saint as religious fiction. But what I really view it as is it's fiction that doesn't divorce religion from it. My biggest criticism, my criticisms are mounting about modern literature for our youth because of all the agenda items that the mainstream press is now forcing us. If you want to write for a mainstream audience, you have to put all this garbage in it now that is horrible. So it's getting worse. But my biggest criticism besides that is that modern literature for youth divorces religion from the world as if it doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it's always painted in only the worst tone, only the negatives that they perceive religion brings. And so, what I wanted with the Harwood Mysteries, and I think there's a lot of great authors doing this. I always like to plug CatholicTeenBooks.com, which there's 16 of us authors on that site alone, sharing our different novels at all different time periods and genres. But we're all sort of sharing the same idea that our fiction, yes, some of it might be truly religious fiction, but a lot of it is just fiction where we present the organic reality that our faith is part of our lives and our faith is part of our kids' lives. And when I go to like a middle school, I like to talk to middle school classes or homeschool groups about the Middle Ages, but about writing and things like that. I always say to them, look, you guys, you got up this morning, maybe you prayed before you went to bed, you're coming to like a Christian or Catholic school, your parents talk about God, you go to church on Sunday. None of these things are represented in pretty much any book in the mainstream press for our kids. And so it's like God doesn't exist and all of these things don't happen, but we all know that they do. And so my criticism is it's not real life. It's not the life that many of our youth are experiencing. So I think what's important about quote unquote religious fiction is just allowing God to actually occupy the spaces in our lives that he actually does and not pretending like he's not there. And just by allowing us to do that in the story can be more real. It could actually be more realistic
Mhm.
and truer to real life, and especially if it's happening in the Middle Ages around monks and nuns and other religious figures.
Agreed. Agreed. For those who are starting or who are trying to craft religious fiction or have done it, as you're kind of surveying the landscape of what's out there, how do you feel a lot of us are still maybe doing it wrong, or you're not satisfied with how far they're going or where they're staying? Like, how are we doing it wrong? And then how could we start doing it better?
Yeah, well, far be it from me to criticize another writer for doing something wrong. I'm learning myself, but I think the place where we as religious authors often get things wrong, and I think it's getting better, is when we try to force it. And that's why I was really going out of my way to talk about the organic nature of our faith. It needs to be organic to your story. And I cheated a little bit when I put my story in the Middle Ages at a monastery because I knew with no effort at all it would be organic. Religion and faith would be organic. But if you're doing a story that's not in a religious setting, how do our religious fiction authors get religion in there? And I think this was a criticism a lot of like the evangelical movies of 10, 20 years ago especially. But I think as an industry, the movie industry, the writing industry has gotten better at just trying to not be just cheesy overdoing faith issues and forcing things that don't need to be there. And so I would just encourage any religious fiction authors to, yes, that's great to have religious themes in your books. I fully support it, but they need to come. They need to serve the story. The story can't serve them,
Hmm.
and I think that would be my criticism, if any.
Yeah, I've read a couple of well, because of the legend fiction community, I've read submissions where people are trying to they want to share a message, and you have an evangelistic tract effectively covered by a veneer of fictions. Like, well, your characters are there's nothing actually happening. I see what you're trying to do. You can't actually class this as fiction. It's evangelistic literature. But on the other
Right.
side, like you mentioned, Cadfile. It's one of my. I love watching that series. I've not yet read the books, but what I think is it just strikes me sometimes as hilarious how these directors they'll go and they'll try and tell a movie, and they'll try to pivot a holistic, intelligent, mildly controversial character against the bigoted religious establishment or something, and then they think, "Oh, look at us being so bold and dramatic and about what it means to be Christian and so on." And then I go and I watch that and I think, "Yeah, you basically nailed how we think about being, a healthy-minded Catholic Christian, in connection with community, with God, with the world, with creation, and not being a bigot. We're on your side with this." And they end up doing a better job because, like you've mentioned, a lot of religious fiction ends up trying to be evangelistic. Uh, without an actual sense of, well, the other side, as you've just mentioned, on trying to have a more balanced take on Islam. Like we're now 600 years distant from the Crusades. We're now able to read a lot of the literature and the points of view from the other side, and now begin to realize, okay, we can't demonize each other as we used to. It's not accurate. It's not fair. It's not human. Um, we used to be able to do that, and we can't get away with that anymore.
Right, and nor should we want to, right? Because they're part of the human family, and as I think as many of us as religious people of hopefully reasonable sensibilities realize, there are a lot of great people of faith in these different religions who genuinely are trying to live out their faiths. And
Mhm.
while we might talk about doctrine differently, there is a certain universal human element to wanting to live out our faith faithfully. And I do think I was able to do that, in books five, and especially when we talk about book six next year. That was the harder lift. Now, when we get to the Crusades and actually put people fighting each other, that
Mhm.
might be a little bit harder to pull off.
So, given that this is a promotion for your book, brag a little. What's been some of your favorite feedback that you've gotten since the book launch?
Uh, you know, Well, one thing is the books at this point have garnered over a dozen awards. So my bio is a little out of date, and each of the books, now book five hasn't been yet up for awards, but each of the other books have gotten gold medals from reputable book awards. So to me, that's been, as far as the bragging a little. One thing I would say is that's really made me feel very fulfilled as an author, because you always worry as an author, like, I'm trying to write this and I know I'm not perfect and I know I'm still learning and I'm a work in progress. Is it any good? And that kind of gives you some of that outside affirmation from people who, look at books and know good writing from not as good. So that's one thing. The other thing that really has developed is as I've been going into middle school classrooms, I've seen that the books are starting to be used the way I originally intended, which is I wrote this as a historical fiction series because I wanted teachers and homeschool parents and people in groups to be able to use, especially like Shadow in the Dark, the first book, as a way of like supplementing a medieval history element in their social studies class or in their church history religion class or something. And teachers are starting to do this now, and I'm seeing what they're doing with their students and the projects the students are doing. And I have this one teacher from, I guess it was Canada actually, which was great. Had his students do like all these dioramas from the story, and he was sending me the pictures, and I was just like, oh, this is amazing to think that these kids are learning what I really wrote the books for them to learn, and they're also able to sort of garner some of these other great themes, and at the same time hopefully they're enjoying the books and feeling very entertained at a just kind of a entertainment level.
Yeah, at a story level. That's fantastic. Well, congratulations. Before I ask you where people can find you online, you've mentioned you've written the last book in the series. What's next? Are you working on any?
Yeah. Well, I am. I've actually. Well, I do have a full time job. I teach law at Ave Maria School of Law in Naples, and that takes up a good amount of time. But on my side writing jobs, I've got a few things. In fact, I really want to come back next year early on, because I have another book totally unrelated to this that's going to be released in February or March from our Sunday Visitor Press, and it's a modern Catholic history mystery. It actually takes place at a Catholic school. It's written for fourth, fifth, and sixth graders, and it's a female, like a little sixth grade girl, who's the main character, written in first person. So it was a nice, change of pace from my Harwood Mysteries, and she has to figure out who stole the chalice from the altar during a fire alarm that was pulled during church, and it's called Penny and the Stolen Chalice. So that is my next big project coming out. Then book six will follow at the end of the year, and that will complete the Harwood Mysteries. And then one of your friends I know in Chrism Press has picked up a trilogy, a new adult trilogy that I'm going to be starting to release in 2025. So I've got lots of stuff to write.
Fantastic. I mean, you're almost putting out a book a year. Is that right? Like, how
Yeah.
long does it take you to actually write a draft you're happy with before you send it off?
My practice for a few years was I was spending the summers writing the first draft, so about 60 days or so to get the next Harwood Mystery out, and then spending, the next year editing it. But yeah, I mean, I think that's about a fair 60 to 90 days to really write a decent first draft, maybe even like a second draft level, and then maybe another 60 or 90 days to edit it. And as long as I kind of can, devote the time, like especially in the mornings, to my writing, I'm able to do that and also come and do my job.
No kidding. Well, Anthony, Tony, thanks for coming on. How can people find? Where's the best website to learn more about this? Is it your personal website, or you also have a book website? Can you mention both?
Yeah, so antonykolenc.com is my personal website. Anything I do with writing, you'll see on there, including all my nonfiction, my podcast, The Shepherd's Pie, which I do generally every week. The Harwood Mysteries actually has its own website, theharwoodmysteries.com. And of course, Loyola Press also has, the books on there. And you can buy them through Amazon, through Loyola Press. And as I always like to say, if I'm talking to people, go to your local independent, bookstore or Christian or Catholic bookstore and support your mom and pop store. Ask them to stock the books, ask them to order the books for you, because I feel like I love Amazon. That's great, but we've got to support our local booksellers also. So you should be able to find it just about anywhere you want. That's true, though.
Excellent. Thanks again for coming on. Friends, if you enjoyed this sort of thing, authors like Tony and wannabe authors like myself are spending time in the legend fiction community, which is the community for this show where authors can give and get feedback, share their works in progress, and maybe double or triple their writing output because, well, we're having so much fun together. Come and check us out at legendfiction.com. Have a look at the links in the description to visit Antony's website and learn more about the Harwood Mysteries. Looking forward to having you back to talk about your final book in the series and following your adventures with um, Stolen Chalice and then your new trilogy. So,
Yeah,
congratulations.
thank you so much.